Hello everyone, and welcome to the second of a three-part series on reforms to the AIFMD and UCITS frameworks, which have recently been signed into law and which will apply to Irish management companies from Q2 2026. My name is Shane Coveney, and I am a partner in the Dillon Eustace Asset Management and Investment Funds team. I'm joined today by Etain de Valera, who's a partner and the head of the Asset Management and Investment Funds team here in Dillon Eustace. Today, our focus is on the introduction of a harmonised EU loan origination regime, which will set down a common set of rules for AIFMs managing AIFs which engage in lending to third parties. Etain, what activities and what types of funds will come in scope of the new rules?
Thank you, Shane, and hello, everyone. Yes, the introduction of a framework for AIFMs managing AIFs engaging in lending activities is set to level the playing field across the EU for these type of funds. Firstly, the new regime provides that originating loans on behalf of an AIF is now a standalone activity under Annex 1 of AIFMD. This means that once the rules begin to apply, AIFMs will be able to benefit from passporting rights so that an AIF can lend to permitted borrowers established in another EU member state, without being required to obtain local permissions to do so. Secondly, the new framework introduces the concept of 1. A fund which engages in loan origination or originates a loan, and 2. A loan originating AIF. An AIF will be originating a loan where it grants the loan either directly or indirectly through a third party or SPV, and where it is involved in structuring the loan or pre-agreeing its characteristics prior to it taking exposure to the loan. Importantly, the new framework recognises that while there will be funds that engage in the activity of loan origination on an ancillary basis, where this type of investment is not a core element of the fund's strategy, such funds should be distinguished from loan originating AIFs. Under the new rules, loan originating AIFs are AIFs whose investment strategy is mainly to originate loans, or where the notional value of the AIF's originated loans represents at least 50% of its net asset value.
Why is the distinction between a fund that engages in loan origination but which is not a loan originating AIF important?
Well, the full suite of loan origination rules set down in the new framework will only apply to loan originating funds. Therefore, where an AIF is not a loan originating AIF for the purposes of AIFMD2, while it will be subject to some of the new rules, it will not be required to comply with all of them.
Does the new regime provide any flexibility around liquidity for loan originating AIFs?
Yes, while the default position, as you would expect under AIFMD2, is that loan originating AIFs should be closed-ended, it will be possible to establish a loan originating AIF as an open-ended fund, provided that certain conditions are met. As you would expect, the AIFM must ensure that there is an appropriate liquidity management system in place, which should be consistent with the relevant AIF's investment strategy and redemption policy, and ensure fair treatment for its investors. We can expect further detail on these requirements for such funds to maintain an open-ended structure when ESMA publishes its consultation paper on such measures in Q2 or Q3 of 2024.
Some of the new rules were more heavily negotiated than others, not least that relating to leverage. How will AIFMD2 impact on permitted leverage for loan originating AIFs?
Well, until now, there have been no express limits on leverage imposed by the EU on any type of fund under the AIFMD regime. However, the new loan origination framework has introduced leverage limits on loan originating AIFs at levels depending on whether they have been established as open-ended or closed-ended AIFs. Open-ended loan originating AIFs will have a leverage limit of 175%, while closed-ended loan originating AIFs will have a leverage limit of 300%. In either case, the leverage must be calculated as the ratio of the exposure of the AIF using the commitment approach to its net asset value. It is worth emphasising that these leverage limits only apply to funds constituting loan originating AIFs and therefore will not apply to AIFs which engage in loan origination but where this is not a main part of that fund's investment strategy.
Are there any exceptions to the leverage limits?
Yes, the leverage limit will not apply to either temporary borrowings of the loan originating AIF that are fully covered by capital commitments or to shareholder loans which meet the specific criteria set down under the new rules.
How has AIFMD sought to ensure that AIFMs managing AIFs which engage in loan origination keep skin in the game with respect to their lending activities?
Similar to the approach taken in other EU legislation, any AIF engaging in loan origination will be required to keep 5% of the notional value of any loan originated by it. That risk retention amount must be held up to maturity, where maturity of the loan is up to 8 years, or where the loans are consumer loans, and for a period of at least 8 years for all other loans. Again, there are some exceptions to this risk retention requirement, such as where the sale of the loan is in connection with the wind-up of the AIF, or such sale is part of the investment strategy of the AIF and the sale is in the best interests of investors, provided always that the AIFM must be able to justify availing of any such exemption to its competent authority upon request.
The introduction of the new regime seeks to promote the ability of AIFs to develop the non-bank lending sector. However, how does the new framework look to address the potential systemic risk posed by AIFs engaging in loan origination?
In short, the legislators have sought to manage this system risk by imposing certain concentration limits on funds engaging in loan origination. Therefore, the extent to which AIFs, whether or not loan originating AIFs, may originate loans to financial institutions, including other AIFs and UCITS, will be limited to 20% of the relevant AIF. However, AIFMs are given some flexibility under the new rules in that the concentration limit will not apply during ramp-up periods of up to 24 months, where the AIF enters harvesting mode, or in periods of temporary suspension of up to a maximum of 12 months, where there is an additional capital raise or a reduction in capital in the AIF.
What other risk mitigation provisions have been introduced by the new loan origination framework?
Some of the additional measures introduced to help mitigate risks include restrictions to avoid conflicts of interests, as well as seeking to address consumer protection and financial stability concerns. Firstly, subject to some limited exemptions, the new regime prohibits lending by a loan originating AIF to its AIFM or its group entities, its staff, any delegate of the AIFM or the AIF's depository. Secondly, while not mandatory, the new rules also permit member states to prohibit loan origination by an AIF directly to consumers and from servicing loans to such consumers in that member state. And finally, AIFMs will not be permitted to operate an originate to distribute model. Therefore, they will not be allowed to manage AIFs that engage in loan origination and whose investment strategy or part of that investment strategy is to originate loans with the sole purpose of transferring those loans or exposures to third parties.
Practically speaking, what will AIFMs with AIFs engaging in loan origination be required to do with respect to such activities?
It will not be a surprise to anyone that the new framework requires that AIFMs that manage loan originating AIFs or which engage in loan origination on an ancillary basis must have effective policies, procedures and processes for the granting of loans, assessing credit risk and administering and monitoring its credit portfolio. These policies, procedures and processes will need to be in place at the time of the establishment of the AIF, but there will also be an express requirement to keep those under regular review and in any event at least once a year. However, it is worth noting that these requirements, again, do not apply to shareholder loans as defined under AIFMD.
In terms of implementation, will this be a truly harmonised EU regime?
The new rules do permit member states to impose more restrictive measures with respect to loan origination and loan originating AIFs. So it will be interesting to see whether the NCAs of all member states remain faithful to the finalised agreed legislative text, or whether any individual member states will choose to supplement or gold plate the new rules with additional domestic provisions. From an Irish perspective, helpfully, the central bank has indicated that it will, in due course, move to align the domestic loan origination framework with that of AIFMD2.
Finally, how long before we see this new regime take effect?
The new rules will begin to apply in early 2026. However, the regime does include some transitional provisions. For example, AIFMs managing AIFs that originate loans and that have been established prior to the effective date of AIFMD2 shall be deemed to comply with the provisions relating to the restrictions on lending to financial institutions, the requirements applicable to open-ended funds, for a period of 5 years from that date, or indefinitely where there has been no additional capital raising by such AIFs. There are also specific transitional provisions relating to the leverage cap for those funds established before the new rules begin to apply in early 2026.
Thanks, Etain, and thanks to everyone for joining us. We hope you found our conversation helpful, and please just visit our website to access the other 2 episodes in our series on reforms to the AIFMD and UCITS frameworks.